Massachusetts and Pawtucket peoples. And these peoples have stewarded this land where I am throughout the generations. And I just want to thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. So tonight, I think we're all coming together really for a number of different purposes, but I know why I'm here. I'm here to kind of learn and also share ideas, as well as gain some knowledge about some of the NRCS programming. And I would say probably many of you are probably here as well for those similar reasons. But I'll say that the Forest Stewardship Program really has continued to reinforce something that really a discovery I made about 25 years ago. And this discovery profoundly changed my view of forestry and why I chose forestry as a profession. And this discovery also changed and challenged me as a forester and how I operate within my profession. It turns out forestry is more about people than it is about forests or trees. So I'm really excited to share what Allison and I have been working on most recently. So Brett Butler, Dave Kittredge, and others have really provided a clear message to us in the conservation community, and that's if we're interested in forest conservation, we must be interested in those who actually own the forest. So you, the family forest owner, have done remarkably well to steward this land. And with the support, hopefully these family forests continue to stay forests and continue to grow and be resilient for many years to come. So many of you may be, wondering, what this is. This comes from a long line of research and survey work that's done by Brett Butler. And it comes down to the reasons for owning woods in Massachusetts. And really, many of you know that you hold multiple objectives simultaneously. Amenity values, those beauty, privacy, wildlife, habitat, nature protection, and recreation and so forth, those amenity values dominate why you own the forest. And really promoting these activities, those amenity values, enhance the biodiversity and resiliency, and really help maintain our forests as forests. So maybe it's because I like history so much, but I always seem to kind of go back to this slide just because I find it remarkable and to see where we are today here in Massachusetts. But it's really about looking at what the future forest may look like. And it's difficult to kind of predict that, but I can tell you that, from 1810 to 1870, which is about 60 years, Massachusetts lost about 2 million acres of forest land. That's 33,000 acres of forest lost a year. And that was mostly done under soft conversion. That's converting forests to generally agricultural use. What you can kind of see towards, as we get into the 70s and 80s and such, we're starting to see a little bit of a downturn with forest land, and that conversion is really completely different than what happened in the 1800s. And this conversion now is what we call hard conversion, and that is going directly towards development. So we have a variety of programming throughout the state, both from the federal government side through the USDA, through state as well as land trust and other NGOs, about addressing this and addressing this sustainability concern that we have, which is the loss of forest land. So, this figure here that comes from Kittredge, I think, really shows the stark difference between how towns were set up in 1980 and kind of where we're seeing this change, which is, in many cases, it's going from either a rural type town to an urban town or a rural type town to a suburban. but you can see where these changes are occurring, and these are happening, at a fairly, what I would consider a quick pace for Massachusetts. So we talked about a little bit why why you own your land. And if you remember that graphic, harvesting timber was definitely not even in the conversation. It was generally the lowest, or pretty close to being the lowest objective that landowners have. However, the important thing to remember is that in most cases, most of the landowners are cutting timber under their ownership. So if we're kind of going to have a mature conversation about this, we have to have a conversation that in most cases across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, timber is going to be cut by landowners. So how can we inform that better, not only just from a perspective of planning purposes and making sure that it's done correctly and done in a way that the landowner desires, but also, under increasing climate pressure on these forests, how can we do it better to make sure that those values are also available? So, much of this comes from the Forest Stewardship Program and the funding mechanism, which is the Working Forest Initiative. And we spend a lot of effort and time through landowner engagement, through programs like Kate has put on and NRCS has put on for like this evening, with the main focus is maintaining forests as forests. That's really what the stewardship program is about. And to do it in a way that assists you and helps you manage it in a way that you see best fit for your objectives, which we all know are many. So we've been fortunate with the Working Forest Initiative not only to have robust funding and technical assistance to landowners, it has absolutely turned the whole idea of making better informed decisions upside down. So, not all, just a short time ago, about 12 years ago or so, according to Brett Butler's data from the Woodland Owner Survey, you can see the vast majority of folks in Massachusetts did not have a management plan. And that really, to be honest with you, has been done through the tireless support and efforts of Massachusetts licensed consulting foresters. And, I will tell you, study after study in the scientific literature has shown that forest planning documents like the stewardship plan are an effective intervention point, and especially when it comes to increasing engagement with climate. So, you know, the other piece that comes through some of the research out there is the importance of these planning documents specific to natural resource professionals and being engaged with them, like foresters, because that is the central role in how landowners make decisions. And so we have a number of things that we can add on to with the stewardship program and the stewardship plan. One that recently, back in 2015, went and became part of our lexicon here in Massachusetts is the Foresters for the Birds program, which I have to give full credit to Vermont because they're the ones who created this program, and we basically took it exactly as is from Vermont and plugged it here in Massachusetts. So it's wildly popular with landowners. Most of the plans that we cost share on a yearly basis, over 50% of them have bird habitat assessment component to them. So it's clearly an important program for you, the landowner. And if you haven't thought about it, or if you're thinking about it, please reach out to Allison or myself later tonight or at some other point, and we can definitely talk in more depth with regard to the Forester for the Birds program. So it's important to recognize, yes, we did pull it almost, entirely from Vermont. However, Vermont is not Massachusetts. So one of the main driving reasons why we have that Forester for the Birds program here in Massachusetts really comes from some of the research and the literature as well as the science. This is a graphic from John Scanlon back when he was working for Fish and Wildlife. This is in a presentation he did in 2015. And this is specific about, kind of what our landscape looks like in terms of the upland landscape and kind of where at least the wildlife biologist side of forestry is looking to kind of trend things. And not to say that this is, set in stone, but it is to give you an idea that we are in a forest that is really uniform in terms of age and composition, and in order for the forest to be a little bit better suited for whatever climate wants to throw at it, probably need to think about how to diversify just a little bit. This is specific for bird habitat, but you also think about this in terms of climate resilience. So, if we can kind of think back to that slide about if we can think that the majority of landowners across the Commonwealth are harvesting timber at some point during their ownership, then we can also think that some of those harvesting activities are, maybe positively influenced and, are doing good things for climate adaptive action on the ground. It's not done purposely, it's done incidentally. So, the climate forestry program is really about providing information and knowledge so the management actions on the ground can provide a more resilient forest for the long term. So I think we all know that Massachusetts is kind of unique with regard to its opinions on things, and I would say that it translates well with regard to climate change. Here in Massachusetts, according to Butler, it is a great concern. Well over 50% of the folks here in Massachusetts believe that it's a concern or a great concern. Compared to a much smaller percentage, 37% across the U.S. So it's another reason why we have this climate forestry program, and to be honest with you, it was informed quite well with some really, really smart people, and this is basically the team that built it. And at this point, I'll just pass it over to Allison to speak a little bit more eloquently about the climate program.
Thanks, Mike, for the introduction and a great lead up to information about what we've been doing in climate forestry at DCR. It's great to be here with you all. And I'm just one of the service foresters in Western Franklin County where the Climate Forest Stewardship Program has been launched as a pilot program. Our DCR Service Forestry Program has been working with our local and federal partners, as you saw in that last slide, on this project since 2020, with an increased work schedule for us on the Forest Climate Management Plan, which we started really heave-hoeing on in 2021. Our partners at the federal level include the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, and at the local level, we have Mass Audubon and New England Forestry Foundation and the Mass Woodlands Institute partnering with us on this project. So we've been working on 3 separate projects. Oh, go back one, Mike.
Sorry
go back
about
one
that.
slide. That's okay. So we have 3 separate large projects that are within this climate forestry program that we've been working on with the partners. And so the first of these is the Climate Forest Stewardship Plan, the components that should be in that plan, excuse me, the directions for preparation for the foresters of the plan, the climate informed training booklets for the foresters, so documents supporting literature, and finally trainings for those foresters. The second project has been to develop information guides on forest carbon markets for municipalities, in particular to help guide them when they have town forest land. And our third project has been to work with the timber harvesters to better understand how climate change has affected their operations and to work on trainings that educate them about climate change. And we are also looking at enhanced BMPs, that's best management practices, that will help to mitigate the on-site effects due to heavier rainfalls and shorter, warmer winters, which we all know we're starting to suffer through. All right, Mike, next slide, please. Our group has developed guides for foresters and municipalities, as I just mentioned, to educate and engage people in the climate adaptation and mitigation discussion. We hope these guides provide opportunities for foresters and landowners to contemplate on how their forests might change and how they could participate in forest climate adaptation. And so this slide shows you, at least the cover of the booklets, and the last picture is sort of the cover of the licensed harvester survey, where we gathered information from the harvesters about what their concerns were. The first two documents can be found on the DCR Service Forestry website for you. Next slide, please, Mike. So the Forest Stewardship Program has always been about educating and engaging forest landowners, as Mike just talked about for quite a while. And, he's so correct. In my 25 years, I've also learned how important it is to connect with the forest landowner and really hear them and listen to them about what they would like to see their forest look like and how they would like to use their forest maybe, and maybe several different uses such as birds or climate, maybe mountain biking and hiking. And so in regards to climate, our group has developed 3 new guides for landowners to learn about climate forestry and to help them set goals. 2 of these guides focus on learning about forest adaptation and managing forest for carbon. All of these guides can be found on the DCR Service Forestry website. Next slide, Mike. So our trainings for foresters are focused on identifying how a landowner's forest may be vulnerable and at risk due to potential impacts from climate change. In the plan, they will link that information to actions they, or the landowner, of course, can take to support climate adaptation through the management practices. Next slide, Mike. In most cases, these management practices have the goal of creating high forest complexity. So the definition of high forest complexity is promoting forests that have a diversity of tree species, ample tree regeneration of future adapted species, vigorous trees of various sizes and ages, a variety of tree arrangements, and an appropriate amount of deadwood gives forests a complex structure and helps them withstand and recover from stressors. So as you can see, there's a lot of work to be done in any given forest stand over a long period of time in order to achieve a forest of such complexity. Next slide, Mike. So as I mentioned earlier, the DCR Climate Forest Stewardship Plan is available to the landowners with forest land within the pilot area. This area is known as the 21 Town Mohawk Trail Partnership Area, and it can be roughly described as west of Route 91 along the Route 2 corridor. And as you see, there's a couple of towns that poke down into the Berkshire Highlands. Next slide, Mike. So our next steps are that we are currently working on evaluating our program and revising directions and any other supporting documents. Our next training for foresters is slated for early winter of 2023. And after their training is complete, we will go statewide with the Climate Forest Stewardship Program. And that's all I have for you today. I'll be looking forward to your questions about our climate forestry program.
Thanks, Allison. As always, much appreciate your view of the climate forestry program. It's really helpful. And so service foresters, there's not a lot of us, but there's enough of us. There's 11 of us across the state. Unfortunately, we have lost Tom Ryan recently. So if you're in kind of the southern Berkshires and in that part of the world, we're going to be scrambling to cover his area, and we're also very close to losing Laura Dooley to retirement, which if you're up in the Essex County area, Middlesex County area of Massachusetts. So we're going to be down 2 foresters again, but we'll figure that out. But please reach out to your service forester. They're a great local resource. We're always available at any time to answer questions about programs and help you feel more comfortable with your decision-making process. So thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Allison or Mike? Stephen had a question, Mike, about how does Mass compare to other New England states on soft conversion? And is soft conversion only to ag or to farmettes?
That's a great question. I can only kind of speak to what the agricultural census data provides, and I'm hoping that will get updated here shortly, which I'm really looking forward to, because it's going to have some agroforestry data points associated with it as well here for the New England area. But in the meantime, I think with soft conversion, I don't think anybody is capturing. I don't believe anybody is capturing that data. Personally, I don't see it in the census data from ag. I mean, you could, from the ag census, you could infer by looking at the amount of forest land on farmland versus, based, on each census, and see if the forest land at the farm level is going down. That's probably, one potential way to look at it. But again, I don't see people collect. I'm not aware of any peer-reviewed, nor am I familiar with anybody collecting that. So that's a great question. I think maybe we should start looking at that.
And Allison, I don't know if you can see the chat. Our towns in the Mohawk Trail Regional Partnership, the only towns eligible now. Buckland is in the, yeah.
Right. I did see that pop up. Although Buckland may not be a member of the Mohawk Trail Partnership, they are still eligible for stewardship funding for a forest climate stewardship plan. There's one more about, what's the next question? Something about West Hampton and Southampton. Okay, so West Hampton and Southampton are outside of the pilot area. So you can wait until next year, and then you should be able to participate when we go statewide.
Yeah, if I could just ask folks, I know it's difficult. I know this is an important piece to people, and it's on your mind because it's on everybody's mind, obviously. But understand that if you can, is the Foresters for the Birds program also started as a pilot program just because we're trying to develop the capacity to deliver it. We need the consulting foresters. It's the only way for us to be successful, to be completely honest with you. And without the consulting foresters trained and ready to hit the ground, that makes it difficult for us to deliver the programming. So, just like with the Foresters for the Birds, we started with a pilot area to get people's appetite and interest sparked, which I'm hoping tonight will do. And then with your help as landowners, you can start calling your consulting forester saying, hey, I just heard Allison Wright speak, and this climate forestry thing seems really, really exciting. And then that forester more than likely is going to show up to the next training. And then that's how our program becomes successful. That's how the Forester for the Bird program is now representing over 50% of the stewardship plans that are written in the state. So I understand it's a very exciting time, and but please, if you can, just be a little patient with us as we get folks trained up and hopefully deliver a really good program statewide. We'd not like to roll it out in a way that really doesn't serve anybody's purposes. So I understand it's exciting.
Yeah. I guess we could see if these 2 questions are quick. Otherwise, we should get going on with the CSP. Ken, you've been waiting though, so if you want to ask a quick question. Otherwise, yeah.
Just a quick question. I noticed you were mentioning the corridor for acceptance in the program. Would Munson be too far south of the corridor? Because I have a spread of acreage up here and I'm interested in the stewardship program.
So great question. No, Munson is, again, is available for the bird program. It's available for the forest stewardship program. At this point right now, in September, no, it's not available for the climate program. But again, as we know, I would say by February at the latest, maybe a little bit later, but hopefully by February, the climate program should be statewide. And then, if you're got land in the state, you're gonna be eligible for that that assessment, that climate assessment on your forest.
Heather? You have a question, Heather, there?
Oh, yes, I do. I was going to ask you, I noticed that I'm in section 4 with Chris Capone, and if he were to come out and see my 30 acres of forest, would he also be able to provide with me the cost behind doing part of this program?
So that's a great,
only because I have very limited finances. I'm taking over a family farm and I can't do everything on my own. So I have to have an idea of the cost behind doing good, which is what I want to do.
yeah, no, great question, Heather. And if you look around in this room tonight, you'll see a number of consulting foresters. So Chris is a state forester. He can definitely help provide you, all the literature, all the background of what the state can provide for financial assistance.
Mm-hmm.
All I would ask is just kind of weigh that against, the phone calls you'll be making shortly after talking with Chris or meeting with Chris and walking your property. He's going to provide you a list of consulting foresters to connect with. And, I think that there was a slide that had a publication, Foresters in the Care of Your Land. I really can't, that's a new publication that we just did. I think it's one of the best pieces of writing I've been involved with probably in my career. I think it's that important because that is the most important decision as a landowner, in my opinion, is finding the right consulting forester that works best for your family and your needs. And, so when you make those phone calls, you're going to have some that are going to say, I can do it for this amount of money. Some can do it for a different amount of money. To be honest with you, I would try to find the person that you want to work with.
Right, like in any business decision.
100%. You got it. You got it.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you so much, Mike and Allison, for that great information. Great to partner with you guys again and hear about funding available for plans and a variety of plans. So, and where NRCS kind of fills in is the implementation of those plans. So I'll start sharing the screen here and we'll move on to the second part of the presentation. I'll just get my technology situated here. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight a few other people here that are helping out. I work at Amherst office as a resource conservationist. My coworker Dan is going to be doing quite a bit of presentation here. Robert Purcell is the district conservationist out of Worcester County. He's going to present with Harry Webb, our very willing participant, CSP participant, to talk about his experience. And we also have Rebecca Foltaz and Rita Thibodeau, who are part of the programs, in charge of programs for the state. So kind of a group effort here. So just a brief introduction to the Conservation Stewardship Program. It encourages producers to address priority resource concerns. Those are at the state level and national level, and to improve and conserve the quality and condition of the natural resources in a comprehensive manner. So to do this, to undertake at least one additional conservation activity. And improving, maintaining, and managing the existing activities across the entire agricultural operation in a manner that increases or extends the conservation benefits in place at the time a contract application is accepted by NRCS. And now my neighbor who has a chainsaw running, sorry. Speaking of forest land. So in the email I sent out and the news release about, getting a payment just to maintain the good work you've done. So that's bullet point 2, maintain what you've done, the stewardship level you've done at that time, and maintain that. And then also do at least one new thing is what we ask. CSP is a minimum 5-year contract. So you'll be maintaining that work you've done for 5 years. And you have to include all your land that you own and operate. Must be included in that contract. So many of you have written to me and said you had forest and pasture. Well, forest is considered separate from agricultural land. So you'll have to include all your forest land and any associated land that's part of that forest, maybe some brush hogged fields, but you don't have to include your pasture or your hay land that someone else hays. So you get forest land applications, and then you have ag applications, and you can do one or the other or both. I think some of you are probably new to NRCS in general, perhaps. So I thought I would just briefly explain how we work. So we provide technical and financial assistance to agricultural producers, including forest landowners, on a variety of resource concerns through a 9-step conservation planning process. So, looking at your objectives, what are the issues out there that you see that we might see? What are some things that can be done to address those concerns? And then the next step, you implement it and evaluate that plan. So resource concern, it's a common word for us. It might not be as much for other people outside of natural resources, but it's an expected degradation of a resource below an established threshold or criteria such that the sustainability or intended use is impaired. I think, it's pretty obvious in some of these pictures, if your future goal is another stand coming along with this barberry here, we definitely have an impairment. Another stand that's overstocked and just not growing to its potential, and, wildlife habitat as well. So these are resource concerns that we take a look at. And certainly that your foresters are taking a look at with you on your forest land. So there's 47 resource concerns in 17 different categories. We used to be the Soil Conservation Service back in the Dust Bowl. We probably mostly were worried about soil back then. Now it's what we call SWAPA, soil, water, air, plants, animals, energy as well. That has come in, and climate fits in with all these, but maybe that'll be a new concern in the future here. And obviously we always consider the human side of it, because without, the humans, we're not going to get anything done in terms of capital or labor management. So I just mentioned these 17 categories because that's going to come up in a bit with regard to CSP eligibility and the payment that you might get. So we'll take a look at your all the land that you own and operate and kind of identify what are the land uses, and you'll do that as well with the NRCS planner. So naturally we have forest, only non-industrial private forest land is eligible. You have your farmstead, which is much less common in just forestry plans or applications. Naturally, if you have a dairy farm, they're going to have a farmstead, right? But if you just have your woodlot in the back and you hire a logger to come, you probably don't have a farmstead. But if you do have a farmstead with some energy use there related to your woodlot, petroleum storage, then we would assess the resource concerns on the farmstead as well. And the same with associated ag land. The best example I can give for associated ag land related to woodlots would be kind of extensive herbaceous wetlands that don't qualify as forest land. Maybe some fields that you just brush hog, 5-6 acres of brush hogged land that you maintain for wildlife that's definitely not growing trees. And then, the cropland and pasture, but we're considering those separate and not the emphasis of today's meeting. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dan Lenthall, who's the kind of forestry expert within NRCS for Massachusetts, and let him take it for now.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening. I'm using the term Forest Management Plan, Forest Stewardship Plan for the DCR products that were previously mentioned. So the Conservation Stewardship Program builds upon those plans and goes a little step further. Okay? And the Conservation Stewardship Program can help you implement or apply or do some of the things that are in that Forest Management Plan or Forest Stewardship Plan. And I think that was mentioned before about the costs. We try to assist, this program tries to assist the producer in deferring or covering the cost of some of these activities. So, okay, Kate moved ahead. I forgot, I'm not able to do that. Okay, so it all starts with inventorying, assessing, evaluating the land you have. Again, using the Forest Management Plan. I'm just going to stick with that term as a basis. We work to look at the certain categories that Kate mentioned that are defined for the Conservation Stewardship Program. Why don't you go to the next one? So each land use has a thing. Now, I tried to make a comparison here on what NRCS is evaluating on your property and putting them into question type things. So as far as Conservation Stewardship Program in forest land, we have to, again, by national policy, look and assess at least those 7 type of categories. Again, on the right is the resource concern category, and on the left are some of the questions that somebody in NRCS might ask you or at least have to add into the evaluation. Okay, concerned about gully erosion. Are there gullies in your forest? That's basically a yes or no. Now that can actually be, there may be things in the Conservation Stewardship Program that can address those gullies. Degraded plant condition. That's kind of a broad term, but it's, are the stands, forest stands, adequately stocked with desirable species? That was also mentioned in some of the climate smart. A variation of species, ages, types. Okay. Fire management, again, this is a national concern. It's not really a big concern in Massachusetts. We don't have extensive wildfires. We have lots of little ones here and there, but it's still something that's assessed. Pest pressure. Generally, when we talk about pest pressure, we're talking about invasive species. The plant species, invasive plant species that affect both the forest growth and also wildlife habitat. Again, soil quality limitations, again, a requirement for Conservation Stewardship Program. So we're looking and assessing whether the soil is compacted, whether there's enough organic matter. Is there any problems with the tree growth related to the soils? Terrestrial habitat, basically wildlife habitat. Those that are interested in the We've heard forestry for the birds. Those are terrestrial species. We can do things with Conservation Stewardship Program that enhance the wildlife habitat, the birds, the cottontails. There are some areas, things like that. And wind and water erosion. Again, it's required. Are there signs of topsoil eroding in the soil? Generally, not that much, but it's something that needs to be assessed. Please go next one, Kate. Okay. Associated ag land. Again, if it's connected to the forest operation, we look at some of the similar things. Are there gullies in these other remote non-forest areas? Are there invasive species that are in areas that aren't really managed for forest that could spread into the forest? We want to try to address those at an early stage. Again, terrestrial habitat on those other areas, they may be the mowed field that Kate mentioned, or certain other areas that not really forest, but also good for wildlife. And again, wind and water erosion. We did come from the Soil Conservation Service. Okay, so let's follow through with that a little bit about the inventory. When NRCS staff are working with you, they are answering questions in a software package related to Conservation Stewardship Program. And it starts out by saying, okay, given the answers, given the situation, given the assumptions here, is the land being managed to meet at the time of application? You'll see 4 highlighted things that the present resource concern, the present condition is already being met. We are interpreting, the agency, the program is interpreting that if you've met following this assessment, you are good stewards in those 4 categories and can go further in the planning stage to enhance those, or take some of those categories that are not met, such as degraded plant condition, apply practices, which may or may not be in your forward stewardship plan, but often it is. Okay, so that we can take that through the planning process and through activities, move those categories from time of application not being met to the end of contract being met. These are some of the existing conditions, and this is how the eligibility program is established here. Now, again, this is all highlighted down in policy that to be eligible, the forest land has to have 2 categories being met at the existing condition. Here there's 4. Okay, we check off a box. And then at least 1 additional category by the end. We will show one a little later where it shows a change, but there's also presently 4 being met, which means already you are eligible for the program. You can get in the door with this program with the conditions as it's being evaluated. So Kate, please go to the next one. Kate, okay, all right. Now, we're talking about forestry. One of the big categories, one of the big conservation practices that NRCS uses is called forest stand improvement. We've worked for the government. It has a code, 666. Okay, and that often refers to many of the levels of treatment in the stand, things that are actually working in the forest, what you're planning to do in the forest, whether it be for timber harvest, some for wildlife, others for regeneration. All those can be put into that forest stand improvement. That is the conservation practice. Now, an enhancement that we talk about in conservation stewardship is a smaller activity within the conservation practice that adds a little more benefit. And what Kate put together is we're reducing the stand density to create more open stand structure and therefore more room for regeneration, change of species, all those things. It's one step above. Okay, now, oh, no, go ahead, go back there, Kate. We put together, basically just highlighted 5 of the conservation practices, NRCS conservation practices that are commonly used in the forest. There are more. But again, we don't want to geek out on you, overload you with piles of information. But the 5 we primarily took was forest stand improvement, okay, managing the trees. Let's say it that way. Managing the trees, managing the stand. Brush management often falls into the invasive species category, things like that. Early successional habitat. Those are actions in the forest that are creating changing the stand diversity, changing the age structure, trying to add that horizontal diversity into the forest. It's creating open areas for a new stand, regenerating things. Upland wildlife habitat management. These are doing things specifically for habitat, for birds, for rabbits are a big one, and there are, again, other type of wildlife that may be present in the area, and then structures for wildlife, enhancing, places for nesting, brooding, all that stuff. The big two there within that structures are bird boxes, they're bat houses, brush piles, little tiny, smaller activities, smaller structures within the forest that wildlife may be using. So we're kind of replicate that. Okay, go to the next one, Kate. All right, now, as far as our conservation stewardship program, tying into the forest stewardship and forest management plans, in red, I've shown things that I've seen in forest stewardship or forest management plans, called for or recommended or whatever by the consulting forester. We have thinnings, improvement cuts, shelterwood, patch, group selection. All of those activities in your forest stewardship plan, forest management plan, are really NRCS forest stands improvement. It's that interpretation that we need to put together. We have to classify that practice. So although the forest stewardship plan may say thinning, we're still going to call it forest stand improvement. We highlight those a little more in some of the sheets or some of the information guides we may put together for you. But forest stand improvement is very wide. Now, common enhancements, again, unique to the forest, the Conservation Stewardship Program. These are going a little further. You'll notice that Kate and I listed on this sheet 3 pages, three different enhancements, all related to forest stand improvement. One, they're given the code, the 666, forest stand improvement, and the enhancement is D. We just chose some. That's really thinning to create more understory. Again, good for lateral vertical diversity, good for new species, good for certain areas of wildlife. And another one, F, again, tying it into the forest stand improvement, is thinning and controlling the understory vegetation, generally the unwanted undesirables, i.e. the invasive species, and others to manage manage the land along the road for either wildlife or increasingly we may see wildfire a risk, and widening those roads are similar to a fire break that they may use out west. Okay, so why don't you go to the next one, Kate? I think there's a couple more. I don't need to get too involved with it, but there are a lot of enhancements just with forest stand improvement. Okay, and Kate put a little bit, all right, so a common one is snags, dead trees, coarse woody material. This is creating snags, dead trees for wildlife purposes within the stand. And the guide sheet for this activity basically spells out how many are desired per acre, how many there are, and how many you might need to implement this snag feature. Okay, dead trees. Why don't you go to the next one, Kate? And again, enhancement. Each enhancement comes with its sheet that tells how to do things, what's needed, and some explanation and education on each one of these. We took this one to, just as a demonstration, there are dozens to reduce this forest stand density. Okay. First of all, there's a lot of enhancements that go with silviculture activity. Don't stress about memorizing some of these enhancements. We could pick and work with you to find those out. We go through the list, see what fits your objective, what is in the forest management or forest stewardship plan. Again, if you're interested in birds, if you're interested in certain wildlife, if you're interested in timber management, there is probably an enhancement for you. And again, we help with that. We provide the planning actions. We explain things as they go along. And we also want to say that generally we would have most of the things that are planned in the Conservation Stewardship Program probably are also mentioned or scheduled, for lack of a better term, in the Forest Stewardship Plan. So why don't you go to the next one, Kate? And maybe, okay. Now, as an example, I used that same assessment that I presented before and showed the after conservation practices enhancements were entered into the evaluation. And what happened is we moved several from conditions not being met to being met. The six little arrows show that we demonstrate an improvement in all of those categories with the plan as it's prescribed and implemented. So you can see the ones in yellow, they went from not being met to being met with the activities. And there are others that were exceeded. The term exceeded is a term unique to Conservation Stewardship Program. It means gone a little bit, it's gone beyond the basic minimum. Okay, why don't you go to the next one, Kate? Is Bob picking up this one, or am I? Kate?
Yeah, you.
Oh, okay, all right. Fine. We weren't sure where the break was. From the planning process, NRCS works with the producer to develop the conservation plan, the land area, and the activities that are going to be occurring in the future. Okay. And, there's documents. The map is a key point. We try to relate those to the forest stewardship plan, forest management plan, and then each of the activities that are being planned, both practices and enhancements, are listed as to where they're going to be, when they're going to be, and about how much it's going to be. So these are some of the documents that come out of this. Okay, so we mentioned the forest stand improvement. That conservation practice would have the how to do it, where to do it, why you're doing it, so that the implementation requirements are kind of the guide. Foresters would be familiar with that. As I mentioned, forest stand improvement has many different things in forest stewardship plans. I mean, conservation plan will list forest stand improvement with some of the qualifications, and we try to tie those to the way they're written in the forest stewardship plan. based on the regeneration, the type of cut, and anything else that is added. We fill these in to provide you, and generally with the assistance of a forester, a consulting forester, as Mike mentioned, a way that we expect it to be done. It's not entirely hard and fast, but yeah, these are kind of the rules for the program. And it's for information and understanding the future. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, Kate, now you're talking about money.
Yeah. Okay, so since I had put that a little bit about payment in the meeting invite, I thought I'd just go through briefly how the payment works for CSP. So there's two parts of the payment. There's the existing activity. So the payment for all those categories that you met at the time of application. And it's just there's 7 of them to pick from that we listed there that are nationally required. So how many of those 7 did you meet when you signed up? And then the other part of the payment is the planned activities. So the practices and enhancements that Dan was talking about. So the existing activity is basically the number that you met times $300, as simple as that, plus an acreage payment. Now the acreage payment is a minor part of it because unfortunately for forest, it's only 50 cents an acre. And for associated ag, 50 cents as well. And the planned activity payment, every activity has a payment rate. So basically it's, how many acres of it are you doing times that set rate. So you would find all that information out based on the activities, either the 1 or more activities that you pick, where you would tell you, okay, they pay this much. And so you'll know if you can afford to do it and decide to do that practice. So these are the 7 categories that we talked about, the erosion, plant, fire, pests, soil, habitat, and another erosion. So those are the 7 that are eligible for payment. And like Dan said, we'd assess it looking at your management plan and looking at the land. So just to determine how many are met when you signed up. So if you met all 7, you'd get $2,100 a year for 5 years. If you only met 3, you'd get $900 a year. Plus your acreage. If you have 100 acres, you're going to get an extra $50. If you have 1,000, it's going to add up a little more. And then the associated ag land, if you happen to have those 2 land uses, you get a slightly higher payment because there's 4 categories in that that are eligible for payment if you meet those. But I think it's a little less common that you'd have associated ag land as well. But if you did, just showing the 100 acres of forest land, 8 acres of a field that is brush hogged annually for wildlife. So if on that forest land you met 5 resource concerns and you met 3 resource concerns on the associated ag, you had $300 for those 8, plus the acreage payment. So your total existing activity payment would be about $2,500 per year. And then that's a 5-year program. But again, you have to maintain that level that you came to the table with. And then we add the planned activities to that. This would be just an example. Now, you have to do at least 1 activity on land use. So on forest land, if you have forest and associated ag land, you have to do an activity on each one of those land uses to get the payment for each one. But see, most of you will probably just have forest land, so you got to do at least 1 activity. And in this case, I put down 3 activities, but you'll work with your planner. If you want to do a lot, you can. We don't want to overload you. But so here's two of the activities we mentioned. One pays about $200 an acre, the other $650 if you're going to create some little patch openings, maybe just a 1 acre patch. So $700 about. And if you're going to do a large nesting box, that only pays $12, and I'll explain that in a minute. But And then you plan the years. You have to do something in the first year. Within the first year of obligating this contract, you'd have to get something done. And we work with you to do something simple. I mean, it could be a bird box. But then if you want to do more than just one activity, it can be scheduled out over those next 4 to 5 years. So you see these enhancements, they have an E in front because they're enhancements. And then this one down below is actually a practice. So in CSP, the practices pay at a much lower rate than they do under our other main program, EQIP. So that's why this bird box is only paying $11. But if it's something you really want to do, then maybe you throw a bird box in. So just to, if you're thinking you're a little interested in this, if we haven't confused you yet, so how do you apply? You can contact us for sure, and we'll put you in touch with the Farm Service Agency, but you need to register as a agricultural producer with a Farm Service Agency. I'll call them FSA, and obtain a farm and tract number. You'll complete a highly erodible land and wetland conservation compliance form. With government programs, unfortunately, there's a lot of forms. So that's one compliance form, and another is a adjusted gross income certification form. So fill those out with Farm Service. Meanwhile, simultaneously contact NRCS to start the process of developing your conservation plan, like we talked about the process, and applying for funding. You'd submit an application for the program of interest. CSP, we're talking quite a bit about. Your planner can direct you to the better of the two programs. At some point there, you need to complete a direct deposit form, which is required for obligation. And also later on for when you're paid, it would be through electronic transfer. The application deadlines are established per national guidance, and we just had an e-news blast yesterday, I believe, announcing our deadline that it's October 21st. So this October, you can submit an application at any point. If you're interested, I'd recommend calling the NRCS office right off here and to tell them that you'd like to sign up. Then how does the funding work? Basically, all the applications are ranked and are funded in ranking order from the highest to the lowest ranking score until the funds are exhausted. One payment is issued annually. So if you are funded, which at the time we have a pretty decent allocation of funds, so it hasn't been super competitive. So, but anyways, if you're awarded a contract, then there's one payment issued annually after October 1st. And that's for, like we talked about, the existing activity payment plus any practices or enhancements that you implemented. And again, it has to be according to the specifications, according to the implementation requirements throughout the year. And like I mentioned earlier, at least one practice or enhancement is required to be done on a land use to get that payment, and must be done within the first 12 months of the contract. Now, the very important part not to forget is that payments are considered taxable income. So you will get a 1099. So it's very important to know that up front and consult with your tax advisor so that you're prepared for that. Each contract with an individual or legal entity will be limited to $200,000 over the term of the initial contract period. So that would be quite a large operation. So unfortunately, you probably won't be reaching that level. So I think that's the end of the kind of CSP overview and how to apply and like the conservation planning process. So we can take a few questions here. You could take a 2-minute break if you need to stretch your legs. And then we are going to hear from Bob Purcell, who's the conservation planner who worked with Harry Webb on his CSP. Actually, I think 2 CSP contracts. And no, just one. So, and I know my coworkers have been managing the chat, I believe. Yeah, Lise.
Lee, yes. I have several questions. My first question is, how do we engage the landowner as the forester? I'm a consulting forester, Chestnut Forestry Services, and how do I reach out to landowners that think that they're going to get, X number of dollars per acre? Where does the funding come to hire the consulting forester?
Yeah, so, good question. I guess if they just had their management plan finished, maybe there's some recommendations already written in there where they maybe wouldn't need like, further forestry assistance at the time. Otherwise, I guess, there isn't specific money for the forester through this program. So it might be just that the landowner has to kind of spend a little bit money up front, in knowing that they're going to get their annual payment for the next 5 years is kind of how I might look at it as a landowner.
Okay, right. And the landowner engages a forester to do these jobs. Now, if they're already under a stewardship plan, a forest stewardship plan in Massachusetts, are they still eligible for this funding?
Oh, so through the DCR Forest Stewardship Program, you mean?
Correct, yes.
Oh, for sure, yep, because this would just be the implementation side of their stewardship plan.
So if they've already, if they haven't done the project, the implementation yet, they're eligible?
Yep.
And if they've already done the project, well, it has to be applied for, you said by October 1st?
October 21st.
21st.
Yeah, so yeah, things that they've already done wouldn't be eligible.
Gotcha, yeah. And invasive species, that's a big one for me. I'm in central Mass, Worcester County, and invasive species, particularly bittersweet, is a real problem with forestry in my area. Are there programs that will include that? Is that included in the program?
Yeah, so there is funding through CSP for invasive control. Those are quite expensive projects, as you know, so it's the type of thing. Remember, I said that the practices pay a lower rate under CSP. So if someone had a bunch of invasives work to do, I would steer them towards our EQIP, to apply for that. And
Gotcha.
typically we require that the landowner is doing something else on the land along with the invasives control to apply for that.
Understood. Okay, well, that's helpful. I think the program is great. I think it's, I've had landowners tell me it's amazing that the government will pay to help them manage their land, which they otherwise have difficulties holding on to if there's not some way to do the things that they want to do,
Right.
I
Yeah.
think it's great.
Yeah. Thanks for your questions. Okay,
Okay,
Lise.
thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kate. I have a couple questions that I'm trying to put it all together. So as you know, we have the forest management plan. We did some enhancements already. One of the things that I'm not understanding, and before I ask my other questions, I'm wondering if you could explain the life, what is it called? The lifetime practice. What is it called again?
Lifespan.
Practice lifespan. So, like, for instance, we have a 10-year practice lifespan on the work that we did for the invasives. But the cost factor really only covered the 1 year worth of doing the treatments. So are there other programs that we could use if we wanted to have additional work done as far as to make sure that we don't, have invasives coming in? So I guess what the question really is to explain that practice lifespan. And then if you've done something, is there availability to be able to reapply for other funds to help with those pieces? And then I have other questions. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it looks like Catherine wrote in the chat there about
She did, and then I asked a follow-up question to that.
okay.
Because Mike Berry asked something very similar, but I wasn't clear on the answer about coming back. So is it a reapplication to be able to bring somebody back? Or is it the same people that we ask over a 10-year period of time for the same price we already paid them?
Oh, yeah, typically you aren't allowed to apply, which is what you're saying, during that same lifespan. I'm not sure if that has changed at all in our state, but you know, and we do apply, we do provide up to 3 years of treatment. So you know, it sounds like maybe you only got one, but and that is the challenge with invasives, that they are going to come back within that 10 years, unfortunately.
So is there any obligation in regards to us with that 10 years or that practice lifespan? I guess I just really need to understand what the practice lifespan means more, because I have parts of it that's 10, parts of it that's 1, parts of it that's 5. And I guess I never fully understood that.
So with the lifespan, you are supposed to maintain it for that duration. That's what the lifespan is. Now, that doesn't mean if we come out, you know, your contract ended and after 2 or 3 years, and in year 7 you're loaded with invasives, we're not going to ask for your money back. But typically we wouldn't fund that practice again during that time period on the same footprint.
Okay, so now my other questions that go beyond that. So at this point, you know, we're kind of already looking at climate change ourselves, our community. So we are really ready to move into that whole piece once DCR is ready to move into it after this winter. We're actually interviewing people right now that are only certified, that received those certifications already, to get our new consulting forester. But as far as things that we're kind of anticipating, the possibility of doing things like infilling for future adapted species, you know, planting that type of thing. We don't necessarily have it in our plan right now, our forest management plan, to do that on certain parts of our woods, but we know that the forest is going to need that. So who would we actually get to come out to do the evaluating of our forest with NRCS? Because you talk about that, you know, that you'll come out, you'll evaluate, you see if we've met or not met. So our first project was very different from what we're trying to do now. So I'm not sure, like, how do we begin that process? Do we wait until we do a change into our forest management plan based upon our forest consulting forester that comes in, or do we have NRCS come out and do some evaluation so we could start to do some enhancements?
Yeah, I think you could start by contacting the NRCS to come out and, you know, hear what your interests are, your goals. You know, if it's this planting, well, we'd want to definitely get a forester involved. You know, they're the experts on the land and trained through the DCR climate program. So perhaps maybe they just write like kind of a simple update to your management plan without like going with a full bore, you know, full plan update. Sometimes we just need that specific practice kind of outlined, spelled out with their expertise. And so it might just be a, you know, short amount of time of updating your plan. And then since you've contacted us, you can find out like, oh, like, is that even worth having them put in my plan, because do you fund it or not? And so you'll at least be finding out if we fund the things that you're interested in.
Okay.
This is Dan. Let me chime in here. When Kate and I were putting this together, we chose, okay, let's put it, I chose forest stand improvement. There are tree planting practices and activities and a few other things that didn't want to keep you here all night. Okay, so there are many other things where implanting could be done to enhance the habitat, enhance the structure. So there are tree planting things. And again, many other practices and enhancements that are there, but in essence of time, kind of cut it back to certain ones.
All right, I'll contact, then reach out.
Okay, I'm gonna let have Harry and Bob give their spiel, and then we could probably have a little more time for questions after that. So Harry, I'll let you and Bob said it could go organically, so I'll let you take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Kate. Maybe I should start by giving a little background about our farm and how long we've been practicing stewardship here in Hardwick. We moved to the property in 1975, and we acquired house and 10 acres at that time. And basically, it was an opportunity to raise a family here in Hardwick. We weren't involved in any extensive ways with the farm itself as far as managing the forest land, but the entire farm did entail about 200 acres. It wasn't until approximately 1993, when we acquired the rest of the property through inheritance, and that's when we got serious about forest management, which included enrolling in the Forest Stewardship Program, and then in turn renewing that in 2003, again in 2013. And so we're up for a renewal again next year. During that time, we conducted significant amounts of harvesting. We harvested well in excess of 500,000 board feet of timber, and also approximately about 500 cords of firewood. Our last management plan, our forester did a survey, and he concluded that even with all this harvesting, we still had an inventory that exceeded about 700,000 board feet of timber. So I just mentioned that to point out that through the various management practices over the last 30 plus years, it's not only allowed us to improve the quality of the forest land, but also actually improve the volume of the forest land. Moving forward, give you a little background about my involvement with NRCS. That came about in and around 2005 when I was interested in wildlife habitat management. And there were a couple of programs that were available. One that was actually sponsored by the state of Massachusetts, and one by you folks at NRCS. After assessing both programs, I decided that you were probably the best people to work with because, first of all, you made the job a lot simpler. Your representative at the time came out and did an assessment and helped walk me through the actual 10-year program that we had with you for wildlife habitat improvement. And that was on approximately 28 acres of the property. Having said that, NRCS, at least here in Massachusetts, started offering further assistance in forestry. And in turn, I applied for a project to do some thinning and invasive control on a small stand of our forest land back in 2011. And then in 2013, you supported my renewal management plan that I mentioned. And then in 2016, we applied for an EQIP program, which was used to, in particular, control the invasives on about 75 acres. And let me point out that practice was highly encouraged in our 213 management plan that our consulting forester had written. In fact, he had continually mentioned to me the importance of controlling the invasives before our next harvest. And through your assistance, I was able to conduct the control of those invasives. And then we proceeded to also thin that 75 acres. I guess that brings us up now to CSP, which approximately 5 years ago was now offered by NRCS here in Massachusetts. And I spoke with Bob, and he came out and we reviewed the many of the things that you spoke about earlier, Kate. And we in turn entered into a contract for CSP. The project and the land was assessed, and a number of resource concerns were approved. And then we decided on one enhancement, and that was involving creating snags on approximately 5 acres of the CSP property. And here you see the maps that you had provided as part of the EQIP project back in 2016. You can see up in the upper left area the 5 acres that were included in the creation of the snags. Bob and I surveyed the property and actually came up with identified the trees to be girdled for that purpose. There was also a significant amount of coarse woody debris from the harvest that took place back in 2017. So we already had a source of that material on the ground to actually satisfy the requirements of the enhancement. But during the approximately 20 years that I've been involved with you folks, I've worked with, I think it's upwards of 10 different representatives out of your Holden office. And each one of them have been very helpful over the years to help us improve our forest land, improve our wildlife habitat, and in turn, help us manage our property in a much better way. One thing I would encourage people to think about is the importance of having specific plans within your forest management plan, whether it be under chapter or under stewardship, so that you're ready to go with some particular practices that you might seek to have funded by NRCS.
Awesome. Bob here. So to kind of piggyback on that, I first started in Holden in 2014. So I ended up working with Harry off of his management plan that he had written in 2013. And that's when I kind of worked with him off of his recommendations of that management plan to develop an EQIP contract at that time to eradicate the invasives and do a thinning. And then knowing that we have the Conservation Stewardship Program available, and its premise is to pretty much reward good stewards of the land for good land management. And I had a relationship and been working with Harry. That's where, it just seemed like a great fit, and that ties into his management plan. Like, so on the first 2 to 4 pages of every management plan, it has a chart based on like your landowner's goals and objectives. And you can put if like timber harvest is a high, medium, low, or whatever the ranking is on that. I know that, wildlife was a real high priority of Harry and Michelle for managing their property. So, after he did his equip project with us and his cut there, is kind of like now what? And that's where we got into discussions for our conservation stewardship program, because, he has managed his land for 30 years and treated the invasives, had good stand composition, everything like that. So Harry applied for our conservation stewardship program, and I went out there and did a resource inventory evaluation of his property. And like Dan referenced in maybe 20 slides ago, like the 7 different resource concerns that are assessed in every CSP forestry operation. And I went through those resource concerns and questions and figured out what resource concerns Harry met at time of application. And that's where, he gets his payment for each year for 5 years based on the number of resource concerns met. And then he'd also get a small subsequent payment for each acre enrolled. And then this map shown here on the screen, you'll see if you squint in there's 4 red X's, just to kind of hit home Kate's and Dan's comment about eligible land. Harry does own those pieces of property there, but those are cropland. A local farm rents those as hayfields. So in CSP, we have forestry, and then we have like cropland or farmstead as a different type of CSP application. So those 4 fields or 4 areas that are pictured there were excluded from his CSP forestry application and contract due to the fact that they were, cropland, not forested land. But so after Harry finished his equip contract, that's where we sat down and discussed CSP. And what I did as a planner was, ran through his inventory for his property, figured out what resource concerns were met or not met, and then figured out what areas could we either go from met to not met on, or what areas could you go from met to exceeds. And through all of Harry's activities, he'd already met our resource concern threshold for some of the plant productivity and health, plant structure, wildlife habitat stuff. But being, wildlife friendly, wildlife conscious landowner, Harry kind of said, well, you can always do more to improve wildlife habitat. So that's where we went through and discussed different enhancements from our offerings back in 2018. And that's where we kind of decided upon creating snag trees, because it was attainable. There were certainly other enhancements that might have been interesting or possibilities, but, figuring out the feasibility, from Harry's perspective too, it was, practices that he could do himself by creating those, those snags. He didn't necessarily have to pull in a logger to come in and, rely on somebody else to necessarily do a harvest or a thinning or something like that. We were able to go out and in our snag scenario was able to keep or take into account the number of standing deadwoods already and standing snags that were out there. So on that previous slide, I think there was a few slides ago, a chart that showed how many snags were necessary per acre. And I think when, Harry and I went out there and inventoried and kept track of them, gosh, I mean, you had to create a lot less snags than you and I ever anticipated, Harry, just by taking into account what was out there. So again, it was, a very simple enhancement that, benefited the wildlife habitat on his property. It kind of piggybacked on his management that he'd already been doing of the land, and, you know, gave him a good payment every year for 5 years for, you know, kind of maintaining good stewardship of the land. And what I look at and always discuss with landowners is, you know, sometimes you folks come to us with an ask of like, hey, do you guys help financially do this or pay for that? And sometimes we don't pay for your specific asks or wants, but the one thing I like about the CSP program, it kind of rewards you for being a good steward based off of the concerns that you meet, and you can then maybe take your enhancement payment there and, you know, pay for what you were looking to do that we necessarily couldn't help you with. But yes, that's kind of in a nutshell my experience working with Harry.
Bob, let me also mention, you know, probably the importance again of having some of these practices already part of your forest management plan. The selection of the snag enhancement was something that was encouraged by my forester in our last plan. In fact, when we did have some logging done, that was something that he encouraged that we keep those existing snags. In fact, he purposely would mark trees that were already in decline, that were, you know, potential snags, or those that were dead, so that they wouldn't be disturbed. Since that time, almost 5 years ago, since we entered into this contract, we've had an infestation of gypsy moth, and now we have significant more snags that have occurred naturally. In addition to that, there have been other disturbances that I just found yesterday, where a large 70-foot tall pine tree got hit by lightning, and that now looks like a firecracker. So there's another snag that was created by an act of nature. But again, these are things that we've viewed as an important part of managing the forest land, not just for timber, but also for wildlife.
Gotcha. And I have one of my staff members working with Harry right now for a CSP renewal, because after you've completed 5 years of CSP, you can do a renewal for 5 more years, as long as you do one more enhancement to a higher level of stewardship. But one thought that I had a discussion with that staff member and also with Harry, back in 2006 to 2012 range, he created early successional habitat, which has like a 10-year lifespan. And I believe he's exceeded 10 or 15-year lifespan. And Harry, I believe, has exceeded his practice lifespan there. And, that might be another opportunity for us to, go back in there and try to reestablish or recreate that early successional habitat, things like that. So my plug is, when you really are working with your service forester, or not your service forester, but your forester that writes your forest management plan, is that's really your time to get your voice heard in, how you want to manage your property and what goals you have. That initial interview and meeting with your forester that's writing your plan is your opportunity to really put in a plug for how you foresee, you owning and managing your property for the next 10 years.
Barry, we had a question, if you don't mind sharing, how much out-of-pocket cost did you incur in order to meet your contract, your CSP contract?
Well, let's put it this way. Most of the revenue has gone into managing not only some of the wildlife habitat area, but also the infrastructure of the property. that's been an area that I've been keenly interested in doing to ensure that we have good access to our various timber stands. I've learned over the years that if you have a good network of trails, of main skid roads, as well as log landings, that enhances the payments that you might receive from a logger, because it makes it a lot easier to do the harvesting. So much of the payments have been used not only for equipment, small tool purchases, but also some contract labor to do that type of management.
I mean, I can't speak to how many hours that Harry had to spend to necessarily girdle his trees and receive his payments, but I mean, you know, using him as an example, it was Harry with a chainsaw to successfully implement and carry out his contract that, you know, you did the snags in that first year to meet the requirements of an enhancement or practice within the first year. And or maybe I broke it up first and second year. I don't remember off the top of my head, but you know, for 1 or 2 years of action, he got 5 years of payment. So, you know, years 3, 4, and 5, you know, didn't actually have a actual activity planned in those years, but still received a, you know, decent payment for just essentially being a good steward of the land.
Right. And, you know, as I mentioned, you know, most of the revenue went toward improving and maintaining that existing network that we have of creation, the result of past logging operations. So I wanted to improve upon something that has already been created, and this allowed me to continue to do that until we have maybe our next harvest in the years ahead.
Yep. And that's just a great example where, you know, necessarily a want that Harry wanted for his property necessarily wasn't something that we programmatically with NRCS could do, but again, took the financial assistance from some of his simpler practices that he implemented and, you know, reinvested it into his forest in a situation where we didn't have a programmatic ability to assist him there. So that's what I was kind of trying to get at earlier is, you know, we might not directly pay for, you know, some improvement that you'd like to make on your property, but if you went through our program correctly, you know, you might be able to take that assistance and implement it and put it into your property in another way.
So the paperwork wasn't too bad, huh, Harry?
I'm sorry?
The paperwork wasn't too bad to get into the program?
No, it did provide, you know, some resource to, as I said, to continue to manage the property in between any harvest that we might conduct in the future. Because like anything else, everything always wants to return to forest land, even those trails that that you've created. So the other benefit, of course, is the recreational aspects that allows us to enjoy the forest land for not only our family but friends and neighbors as well.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your stewardship, Harry, and for your participation in our programs, and also for sharing your experience tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you, Bob, as well. And Bob will be one of the people that you guys can reach out to. I've got all the office contact information on the screen, phone numbers, and addresses. And I'm also gonna, well, I guess I'll put it in the chat here. I made a survey really quickly. I'm not sure if my technology will work, but I'll put it in the chat, but also email it around to the registrants survey for the workshop. And in there, you can note if you'd like us to contact you to sign up for the program. And certainly you can reach out to the field staff as well. We spoke about CSP, but and not a ton about about EQIP, but basically if you want to do something, just contact us and we can, the planners can guide you with which program is better for your goals. So with that, we'll open up to questions, and I think Joseph has had his hand up. If you have a question there, Joe.
Real quick, Harry, tell Cynthia to give me a call.
Okay, I will. We're having a board meeting right now, so I'll call her after the board meeting.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and land trusts are eligible, so I think that might be what they were talking about. So, anyways, thank you. And thankfully, our other NRCS staff has been manning the chat here. So, but are there any other questions anyone wants to put in the chat or come off of mute? Maybe Joe just still has his hand up from before. Oh, I'll work on getting the link for the survey.
I'll just say this while, maybe people are waiting to have questions. If you're a landowner that doesn't have a management plan, or if you're a landowner that has a management plan and you're interested in your next steps, still reach out to us. On top of DCR having programs available for management plans, NRCS, sometimes we have another ability to offer some financial assistance towards plans being developed. And if you have a plan that's developed, we can look through that and, work with you as a landowner to see which program is the best fit. It all starts with us, working through your management plan, meeting with you on the site and doing our, inventory and evaluation. Our inventory and evaluation is and should be the same for all of our landowners and practices that we work with. And, that will really tell us if, our environmental quality incentives program, which stands for EQIP, is, the right fit, or if the conservation stewardship program is the right fit.
I want to speak to Maxim's question there. So if you have a heavy lifting, heavy expense project, EQIP will be the way to go. If Harry mentioned 70 acres of thinning, or say 70 acres of invasive control, or you want to do a 5 or 10 acre patch cut. I think those are better suited under EQIP. Now we have set payment rates per acre. So just say like maybe $1,000 an acre for a patch cut. We do have our rates. They're not posted they're not posted yet. We don't have them yet for 23, but the 22 rates are online and you can call NRCS and ask. But we have a set rate per acre. And then on this chart I'm showing here, you see so this could be patch cut, and you're going to do 10 acres. So we'll tell you how much that we'll pay. Then it's kind of in your job to investigate how much is it going to cost to get that job done. So if it's a 10 acre, I'm thinking of 20% of 60 acre lot to be cut in sections with another 20% thinned. Okay, so basically you'd work with your forester to say, all right, I want to thin 20% of my property. Is it going to net me money or is it going to cost me money? Maybe it's going to net me money, but if I can get some NRCS money, maybe we can remove even more of the dead wood that's not as merchantable. So basically, if you can kind of get the economics of that project, you can apply for NRCS. How much are you going to give me? Work with your forester on the economics of the cut to decide, is it going to be an out-of-pocket cost to me, or am I going to make money such that we can do a little better job with this thinning? Invasive control, you know, you would talk to a contractor, how much you're going to charge to do this job, just like you would for a plumbing job or a car auto maintenance, you know, get a quote. Okay, how much is NRCS going to give me? And then then you can decide if you can afford it or not. Maybe sometimes you make money, sometimes you pay money, sometimes you don't do the project because it's going to cost you, you know, a whole lot. So that's kind of my attempt at explaining that. Oh, Hemlock and Beech. So I guess I'd contact NRCS. You know, it sounds like you definitely need some funding to be able to, remove some of those trees. You know, maybe perhaps you leave a few for the wildlife, but remove them to get a new stand started. And, you know, certainly your consulting forester is the expert on how to do that. We just have some funding for it, most likely. Mike.
Yes,
Oh, I don't know, Mike. Well, Mike Berry, you can help with this Mike Berry question, Mike Downey, if you're still there.
I am.
Yeah, so I guess that's me. Yeah, I just had I guess it's not necessarily CSP specific question, but what recently I've come in contact with a landowner or a family who owns land, and it does happen from time to time where we have a situation where there's a current landowner, but the landowner, the ownership might be changing, and even within a family of one member of a family owns it and a younger generation is looking to purchase. So I'm just curious if is it ever worth starting the process of applying for either EQIP or CSP if it's known that somebody else is going to own the land sooner than later, type of thing? Or is it probably easier or cleaner to wait for that land ownership change to happen before bothering to get any paperwork started, kind of thing?
I see Rita Thibodeau is still on if she's willing to take that one.
Sure, I can take that one. So I guess, Mike, the thing to do is to determine what exactly the goals are of the landowners. So if the goals of the landowners are the same for whoever owns it now and whoever's considering purchasing it, or if it's going to be transferred, you can start that process now, and we can transfer contracts from one landowner to another landowner. So that's not a problem.
Okay.
And it takes time, right? The planning process takes time. So it's our deadline this year is October 21st, just because we wanted to get a jump on it, get going early on CSP. Okay. And if by chance we find out that we really don't have enough applications to fund the amount of money that we end up getting, then we can always accept applications anytime, but we could also consider a second sign up.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and typically, usually the case is that the soon-to-be owner has a more vested interest in what's going to happen. So the goals are kind of more associated with them than the current owner, and it's just a matter of how long does it take to get through the process of, they might be forming a family trust to transfer the property or something like that, and it might take a few months to make the property transfer happen. But the person who's purchasing the property is usually more anxious to try to get the ball rolling and get into active management sooner than later. So if they can get into, if they wait, they might lose 1 year and have to wait till the next year for NRCS. Whereas if they kind of initiate the process sooner than later, that they would likely, that process would happen sooner. So yeah, interesting. I'm glad to know that they can just kind of transfer that contract over from one to the next.
Yeah, I would encourage them, or you, Mike, to work with them and whichever office, just to kind of get the ball going on that.
Okay, thank you.
Please, you got another question? before we run out of time?
Quick question. I'm just wondering, as far as in some of the connections that you have with water, you know, as far as the streams and then as far as erosions, things like that. Does that count for like a community of ours, which has homeowners that are around a lake, but trying to take care of the lake and trying to deal with invasives within the lake to keep it as you know, keep it really as good of a lake as it possibly can be? We've done a good job over 40 years doing that, but you know, Phragmites, things like that is starting to come into play. So just wondering if things like that can be part of a homeowners association like ours or not, or if it has to be farm lake, you know, more wild.
For some reason, I think we've been discussing this for a few years. And I think part of the question was, could this be considered kind of a subset of a forest management plan? Is there any way to roll that into a forest management plan? Because it's kind of a challenge, I guess, to just look at that as possibly a standalone. It could possibly fall under EQIP, but Kate, we've been talking about this site, right? For a few years.
It doesn't ring a bell to me, actually. Sorry.
No?
Yeah, no, I'm just, because I know that we're constantly in conversation with our own pond preservation committee, and we're the forest management committee. And so we constantly are reminding them of the importance of the forest in regards to erosion and things like that. So I just know that we're hitting up against some of these issues now. We're hitting up against erosion issues. Even though they're dirt roads, they're just the amount of water that's coming down these days is washing things away and washing them into the ponds. So I didn't know if there was a definite yes or no, because it's something we'd have to explore anyways.
Contact your local NRCS office.
Okay.
And that's where we could start talking these things through.
Okay.
Kind of brainstorm.
Yeah,
That sounds good. I have an email already proposed for Emily, so.
excellent.
There you go.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for staying to the end here. I appreciate all the interest, and if you can please fill out the survey, that would help us to improve these in the future, and maybe hold some additional topics. Maybe we get into more detail of the practices, but we just wanted to give that broad overview today. So I appreciate everyone's participation and interest, and Harry again for participating, and Mike and Allison and everyone else. So I hope everyone has an excellent evening.